At 11:05 on a Friday night, my phone rang. My 9-year-old grandson whispered, "Grandpa, Dad's hitting Mom again." I locked my bedroom door. 4 minutes later, I burst into my daughter's house. Her lip was bleeding. My grandson was trembling in the corner. Her husband smirked, tossed a brand new pair of MMA gloves at my feet, and said, "Put them on, old man, or admit you're too scared to protect your family." He thought he was provoking an angry grandfather. He had no idea he was walking me into a trap that could destroy my life. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories. I am so grateful you are here. Comment below with your city or country so I know where you are watching from. Also, please note this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I'm conveying to you is highly useful. I've lived alone long enough to know the sounds of a quiet house. The refrigerator hum. The furnace kicking on around midnight. The occasional creak from the third step on the staircase, the one Margaret always meant to fix and never got around to, and the one I've never fixed either, because some sounds you keep on purpose. I was sitting in the old wingback chair by the front window, with a book open on my knee and a cup of tea gone cold on the side table when the phone buzzed. The clock above the mantel read 11:05, late enough that my stomach dropped before I even looked at the screen. It was Noah. My grandson was 9 years old and had school in the morning, and he was calling me at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. I picked up on the first ring. "Grandpa." His voice came out thin and pressed down small, the way a voice sounds when someone is trying very hard not to be heard. "Grandpa, Dad's hitting Mom again." The book slid off my knee and hit the floor. I didn't pick it up. "Noah." I kept my voice low and steady, the same way I used to talk to him when he was 3 years old and woke up from a nightmare. "Where are you right now?" "My room." I locked the door. A breath. There was a crash. She was crying and then she stopped, and I don't know if... Hey. I was already on my feet. "You did the right thing calling me. Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone except me. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "I'm getting in the car right now." I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door. The hook Margaret put up herself 22 years ago with a crooked nail and a lot of confidence. And I was in the driveway before I'd even pulled my jacket all the way on. 4 minutes. That's how long it takes to drive from my house on Birchwood Lane to Emily's place on Caldwell Street. I know because I'd driven it 100 times in daylight, bringing over Sunday pot roast, or picking Noah up for baseball practice. 4 minutes of oak trees and streetlights, and the particular quiet of a Columbus neighborhood at 11 on a summer night. That night, those 4 minutes felt like 40. I watched my hands on the steering wheel. 69 years old, and they still looked like a younger man's hands, the knuckles a little thicker now, a white scar across the back of the right one that had been there so long I'd stopped seeing it. Margaret used to trace it with her fingers sometimes early in our marriage, asking about it. I always told her it was from a fence post when I was a kid. She never pushed. That was one of the 10,000 things I loved about that woman. "I need you to promise me something, Jack." Her voice in my head clear as the night she said it. We'd been married 3 years. She was sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and her eyes so serious it made my chest hurt. Those hands. "Promise me you'll never use them that way again. Not for anyone. Not for any reason." I had promised her. Right there at that kitchen table with the coffee going cold between us, I had looked her in the eye and made her a promise. I intended to keep for the rest of my life. I was keeping it still. Emily's house was dark from the outside, except for the pale blue flicker of the living room window, the television on nobody watching it. I parked at the curb, walked up the front path, and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time, knuckles solid against the wood. The porch light snapped on. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass panel beside the door. Then the deadbolt turned, and the door swung open, and Marcus Reed filled the frame. I was a big man, 6'1", maybe 210, wearing a gray tank top, dark with sweat across the chest. He held a beer can loose in his right hand, and his eyes were the particular shade of red that men get after a long night of bad decisions. He looked at me the way a man looks at an inconvenience that just knocked on his front door. "Mr. Sullivan?" His voice was slow and dragged out. "Little late for a house call, don't you think?" I looked past him. The living room was a disaster. The sofa cushions pushed sideways, a lamp knocked off the end table, a drinking glass in 3 pieces on the hardwood near the kitchen doorway. And Emily, my daughter, was standing against the far wall, with one hand pressed flat against the plaster, like she needed it to hold herself up. Her lower lip was swollen and split at the corner. Her eyes found mine across the room, and what I saw in them hit me somewhere behind the sternum. Not just pain, but something worse than pain. Something that looked like shame, like she was embarrassed for me to see her this way. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my back teeth. "Emily." I said her name quiet just to let her know I was there. She gave the smallest shake of her, barely a movement at all, just a fraction of an inch, and her eyes cut sideways toward Marcus, and then back to me. "Please, don't make it worse." I understood. Marcus leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and took a slow pull from the beer can. "She's fine," he said. "We had a disagreement. Married people do that. You can head on home, old man." I looked at him. I took in the beer can, the posture, the wet-eyed performance of a man trying very hard to look like he'd had too much to drink. And I said the only thing I was going to say, standing on that porch. "Marcus, let me in." He stared at me for a long moment, and then he stepped aside. Not because I'd asked politely, not because some part of him wanted to make things right. He stepped aside the way a man opens a gate he's already locked from the other side. I walked past him into the house, and as I crossed the threshold, I caught the smell of him sweat, and something sharp underneath it, something chemical and alert, and I thought, with the particular clarity that comes from years of reading people at close range, this man is not as drunk as he wants me to think he is. I just didn't know yet how much that was going to matter. The first thing I did when I got inside was find Noah. He was in the corner of the living room, pressed into the angle where the bookshelf met the wall. His knees pulled up to his chest, and his iPad face down on the floor beside him. I was wearing his baseball pajamas, the ones with the little Cubs logos, and his socks didn't match. One white, one gray. The kind of thing that breaks your heart a little when you notice it. "Hey, buddy!" I crouched down to his level, close enough to keep my voice just between the two of us. "You okay?" His chin wobbled. He pressed his lips together to stop it, the way kids do when they're trying to hold themselves together, because they think that's what the situation requires. "I'm okay," he said. He wasn't okay, but he was trying, and that counted for everything. I put my hand on top of his head for a second, just a second, and then I stood up. Emily had pushed herself off the wall and drifted toward the kitchen doorway, putting the width of the room between herself and Marcus. She was holding her left wrist against her stomach, cradling it, without seeming to notice she was doing it. Her eyes were dry now, but the redness around them told me everything about the last hour. "Emily," I said, "let me see your face." "I'm fine, Dad." "Let me see it." She turned toward me slowly and let me look. The split at the corner of her lip had already started to crust over. There was a bruise climbing up from her jawline, still in that early purple-red stage where it hasn't decided yet how bad it's going to get. My stomach rolled once hard, and then I pressed the feeling flat. This wasn't the time. Marcus had settled himself onto the couch, or settled was too calm a word for it. He'd dropped himself onto the couch, sprawling back with one ankle crossed over his knee, the beer can balanced on his thigh. He was watching us the way a man watches a television program he's seen before and knows the ending to. "Real touching," he said. "Dad to the rescue. You do this every time, Mr. Sullivan, or just on the weekends?" I didn't answer him. I was looking at the beer can. It was a 16-ounce can of Bud Light. And when Marcus had answered the door 40 years ago, 40 minutes ago, it felt like 40 years. It had been maybe 2/3 full. He'd been holding it when he stood in the doorway. He'd taken a pull from it while we talked on the porch. It was still 2/3 full. A man drinking does not hold the same can for 20 minutes and come up even. He drinks or he sets it down. Marcus had done neither. He'd just held it, tipped it toward his mouth at the right moments, and let me assume the rest. I'd been watching people my whole life. The way they breathe, the way they plant their feet, the things they do with their hands when they think no one's paying attention. It was a habit so old and deep I didn't even notice I was doing it anymore. Marcus's feet were flat on the floor. Not sloppy, not shifting. Planted. His eyes tracked my movement across the room with a steadiness that had nothing to do with alcohol. When I stepped left to check on Noah, Marcus's gaze moved with me, smooth, deliberate, like a man following a target at a firing range. The performance was good. For most people, it would have been convincing. He had the vocabulary down, the loose posture, the dragged-out words, the exaggerated blink. He'd practiced this. I let him think it was working. "Marcus," Emily said from the kitchen doorway, and her voice had that hollow sound of a woman who has said the same words too many times in too many versions. "Please, just let him visit for a minute, and then we'll—" "Nobody's stopping him from visiting." Marcus waved the beer can in a generous arc. "My house, right? I'm a hospitable guy. Mr. Sullivan can sit down, have a drink. We'll all talk like adults." He patted the cushion next to him on the couch. "Come on, sit down. Tell me what you think of the place." "I think Emily needs ice for her face," I said. Marcus's expression flickered, just a half-second twitch at the corner of his mouth, and then the easy grin came back. "She bruises easy. Always has. Isn't that right, babe?" Emily flinched. Not from fear exactly, from the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been told a lie about herself so many times she started to wonder if it's true. My hands wanted to close into fists. I kept them open at my sides. "Noah." I looked at my grandson. He was watching me from his corner, those dark eyes wide and waiting. "Why don't you go to your room for a few minutes, okay? Take your iPad." Noah looked at his mother. Emily gave him a quick nod. He scrambled to his feet, scooped up the iPad without turning it over, keeping the screen pressed against his chest, and disappeared down the hallway. His door clicked shut. Then Marcus reached down beside the couch and lifted a gym bag onto the cushion next to him, not from the floor where someone might toss a bag when they come home. From the side of the couch, the narrow space between the arm and the end table, right where a right-handed man could reach it without looking. It had been placed there. The zipper was already halfway open. He reached inside and came out with a pair of MMA gloves, black and red, competition weight, the kind that run $150 at a serious sporting goods store. They weren't worn. The leather was still stiff, barely creased at the knuckles. Brand new. He held them out toward me, dangling them from 2 fingers like he was offering me a drink. "You look like a man who wants to do something with his hands," Marcus said. and the drunk-friendly slur in his voice dropped about half a register, revealing the edge underneath it, sharp and patient as a blade that's been waiting in a drawer. So let's stop pretending and find out what you're actually made of. Emily made a sound in her throat, small and terrified. My eyes didn't move from Marcus. And underneath everything, I was thinking, underneath the anger and the grief and the cold assessment of exactly how dangerous this man was. One word surfaced and floated there, quiet and certain: trap. There are moments in a man's life when everything slows down, not because time actually changes, but because your brain shifts into a gear you didn't know you still had. This was one of those moments. Marcus was still holding the gloves out toward me, dangling them from 2 fingers, like they weighed nothing. That thin smile pulled across his face. And I was looking at them, at the black and red leather, the stiff, unworn seams, and something in the back of my mind was already cataloging everything wrong with this picture. Brand new gloves. Gym bag placed within arm's reach before I arrived. A man who'd supposedly been drinking all evening with a beer can that never got lighter. I let my eyes drift casual as I could make it toward the bookshelf behind him. There it was. His phone propped vertically against a stack of paperbacks, screen angled out toward the center of the room. The small red dot in the upper corner of the screen pulsed once, steady and deliberate. Recording. My heart rate didn't change. I'd spent enough years keeping my face from showing what my mind was doing that it had become second nature, like breathing. I looked at the gloves. I looked at Marcus. I did not look at the phone again. "I'm not putting on gloves in my daughter's living room," I said. My voice came out flat and even the way I wanted it. "Put them away, Marcus." He let out a short laugh, the kind that isn't about anything being funny. "See, that's the thing about you, Mr. Sullivan. You walk in here like you own the place, you give me that look." He pointed at my face with 2 fingers. "That look right there, like I'm something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. And then when I give you an honest chance to back it up, you fold." "I'm not folding." I took 1 step closer, close enough that he'd have to tip his chin up slightly to hold eye contact. "I'm telling you to put the gloves away and let me spend 5 minutes with my daughter." Emily had drifted into the kitchen doorway again, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to take up less space. Her eyes were jumping between me and Marcus with the kind of practiced vigilance that made my chest ache, the constant threat assessment of a woman who has learned to read a room for danger before anything else. "Emily." Marcus didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes on me. "Why don't you go check on Noah?" "Marcus." "Emily." 1 word. Soft. The softness of it was worse than a shout. Her jaw tightened. She looked at me, and what I saw in her face in that half-second was a whole biography of pain, of 7 years of learning when to push and when to retreat. Her eyes filled but didn't spill over. She pressed her lips together until they went white. Then she walked down the hallway and knocked on Noah's door. Marcus watched her go, and when the door clicked shut, something in his posture changed. Not dramatically, just a fraction. The shoulders settled. The performance calibrated slightly downward. "Just us now," he said. "Put the gloves away, Marcus." He tossed them onto the couch cushion instead, a dismissive flick of the wrist, like he was done with that particular prop for the moment. Then he picked up his phone from the bookshelf. He didn't turn the screen toward me. He kept it angled away, thumbs moving quickly, and I watched the reflection in the dark television screen across the room, just enough to see him typing, then hitting send. His thumb tapped once. He set the phone face down on the end table. "You know what your problem is?" He crossed his arms and tilted his head, studying me the way a man studies a puzzle he already knows the answer to. "You think this is about Emily?" You think you came over here tonight to save somebody. I came over because my grandson called me scared out of his mind at 11 o'clock at night. Noah's fine. He's dramatic. Gets it from his mother. Marcus waved his hand. My point is, you walked into this house tonight already having decided what the story was. Big bad Marcus. Poor little Emily. Heroic grandpa to the rescue. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes by about a mile. But you don't know what goes on in this house, old man. You never did. The anger came up hot and fast, the kind that starts in your sternum and radiates outward into your hands. I felt my fingers want to curl. I opened them instead, pressed them flat against my thighs. I know what a split lip looks like, I said. I know what a bruised wrist looks like, and I know what a 9-year-old sounds like when he's terrified. Marcus's expression flickered that half-second twitch I'd seen before. Then the grin came back slower, this time more deliberate. Grandpa, he said, and the word coming out of his mouth sounded like a verdict. Why don't you go home, sleep on it? Come back in the morning when everybody's calmed down, and we'll all have breakfast like a normal family. He bent down and picked the MMA gloves up off the couch. He turned them over once in his hands. Then he looked up at me from under his brow. Or, he said, you could stop pretending you're not thinking about it. My hands stayed open. My feet stayed planted. Down the hall, I heard Noah's voice, a muffled question, and Emily's voice answering him, low and careful. That sound was the only thing that mattered in that room. Good night, Marcus, I said, and I walked down the hallway to my daughter's door, knocked twice, and went inside to sit on the floor with my grandson until his hands stopped shaking, even though mine wanted to. I got Noah settled around midnight. He'd crawled up onto Emily's bed with his iPad hugged to his chest like a life preserver, and Emily had tucked a blanket around him even though it was August and the bedroom was warm. She sat on the edge of the mattress with her hand making slow circles on his back, and by the time his breathing evened out, her hand had stopped moving, and she was just sitting there staring at the wall with those dry, exhausted eyes. Dad, she whispered, you should go. I'll go when I'm ready. I kept my voice low so Noah wouldn't stir. How long has it been like? Her throat worked. She looked down at Noah's sleeping face, at the cub's pajamas, the mismatched socks. He hadn't bothered to take off the iPad still clutched against his chest, even in sleep. A long time, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, fighting it back down. It's been a long time, Dad. Then why are you still here? The look she gave me then, it went through me like a blade. Not anger, not defensiveness. Just this bottomless, bone-tired grief of a woman who had asked herself that question 10,000 times and still didn't have an answer that made sense from the outside. Because I can't leave, she said. Before I could respond, the bedroom door swung open. Marcus leaned against the frame arms, crossed, completely relaxed. The beer can gone now, replaced by a glass of water, which told me everything I needed to know about how sober he actually was. Family meeting, he said pleasantly. How nice. Emily, why don't you go get your dad a cup of coffee? He's had a long drive. Emily stood up automatically and then caught herself, her hands clenched at her sides. Marcus, I'd love to talk to your father alone for a minute. He smiled at her with all his teeth. That's okay, right? Just two grown men having a conversation. Emily looked at me. Her eyes were asking me something I didn't have a clean answer to yet. Go ahead, I told her. I'll be right out. She walked past Marcus without looking at him. He watched her go with an expression of complete satisfaction, then turned back to me and pulled the bedroom door almost shut, leaving it cracked just enough to look considerate. Then he dragged the chair from the corner and sat down backward on it, arms folded over the top rail, and looked at me like we were old friends catching up over a beer. "She can't leave," he said, picking up the thread like he'd been in the room for the whole conversation. "I know that's what she told you, and she's right." He said it without malice, without heat, the way you'd explain a traffic law to someone who just moved to town. "The house is in my name. The joint account, my name's the primary. Her passport is in the safe in my office, and I'm the only one with the combination. Noah's birth certificate, original copy, same safe." He ticked each item off on his fingers, unhurried and methodical. "She can walk out that door whenever she wants. But she walks out with the clothes on her back and nothing else. And Noah stays with me." The air in that room got very heavy. "That's not how custody works," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Not officially, no." Marcus tilted his head. "But custody battles take money. Lawyers take money. And Emily doesn't have access to money that I don't control." He spread his hands open, a gesture of elaborate reasonableness. "I'm not a monster, Mr. Sullivan. I'm just practical." My molars were grinding together. I could feel the pressure all the way up into my temples. "What do you want, Marcus? Right now?" He leaned forward on the chair back. "I want you to understand the situation clearly. Because I think you came over here tonight with some idea about being a hero, calling lawyers, filing reports, making things difficult for me." He shook his head slowly, almost sympathetically. "That path doesn't end well for Emily, or for your access to Noah." "Is that a threat?" "It's information." He stood up from the chair and stretched easy and unhurried like a man who'd just finished a productive meeting. "You seem like a smart guy. I'm just making sure you have all the facts before you decide what to do next." He picked up his water glass from the nightstand and walked toward the door. Then he paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back at me with something new in his expression, something harder underneath the pleasant surface. "One more thing," he said. "About tonight. The gloves." He let a beat go by. "I don't actually need you to put them on Mr. Sullivan. I just need you to want to." The corner of his mouth lifted. "There's a difference." He walked out. I stood in my daughter's bedroom with my grandson asleep on the bed, and that last sentence sitting in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, spreading out in rings, getting colder the further it went. "I just need you to want to." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Not with fear. With the effort of keeping them exactly where they were. I walked to the doorway and looked out into the hallway. Marcus was in the kitchen now, rinsing his glass at the sink, humming something low under his breath. Emily was at the counter with her back to both of us, her shoulders pulled up tight around her ears. And on the end table beside the couch, where Marcus had set it, face down, his phone screen had lit up with a notification. One message. Sender name visible in the preview before the screen went dark again. It started with a V. I sat in my car for 22 minutes before I turned the key. I know it was 22 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard tick from 12:14 to 12:36, and I didn't move once the whole time. Just sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and my eyes on the upstairs window of Emily's house, where the bedroom light had gone out about 5 minutes after I left. The street was completely still. A sprinkler 2 houses down was running on a timer, the soft hiss of it the only sound in the whole neighborhood. Somewhere in that dark house my grandson was asleep with his iPad against his chest, and my daughter was lying in the same bed as the man who had split her lip and there was not a single thing I could do about it tonight that wouldn't make everything worse. That was the part that burned. I finally started the engine and pulled away from the curb, and by the time I got home to Birchwood Lane, the clock read just past 1 in the morning. I didn't bother with the lights. I just sat down at the kitchen table in the dark and put my hands flat on the wood and tried to think. Margaret's photograph was on the shelf across the room. I couldn't see it in the dark, but I knew exactly where it was. 31 years of marriage, and I still knew where everything she'd touched was. The crooked nail by the door, the coffee mug with the chip in the handle that she refused to throw out. The photograph 6 inches from the left edge of the shelf, slightly tilted, because neither of us ever remembered to straighten it. "You're doing that thing again," she would have said, "where you go quiet and start grinding your back teeth." "I know," I said out loud to nobody. The thing was, and this was what was tearing at me sitting alone in that dark kitchen, I had heard this story before, 2 years ago, maybe a little more. I was at the dentist's office on Morse Road, waiting for a crown replacement, sitting in one of those hard plastic chairs, with a 2-month-old copy of Sports Illustrated I wasn't actually reading. The man next to me had struck up a conversation, the way people do when they're both waiting for something unpleasant. Weather sports, the usual nothing talk. His name was Robert Haynes. He was 63, recently retired from the post office, lived over in Westerville. A big, soft-spoken man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and the careful, deliberate way of talking that some people develop after they've been through something that rearranged them. We'd talked for maybe 20 minutes before it came up. "You got family in Columbus?" he'd asked. "Daughter and a grandson," I told him. "Over on Caldwell Street." He'd nodded. And then after a pause, he said, "I had a son-in-law once. Young guy. Called himself an MMA fighter, though I never saw him fight anybody worth a damn." He shook his head slowly. "Name was Marcus. Married my youngest. Seemed fine at first, you know how they always seem fine at first." I remember putting the magazine down. "What happened?" I asked. Robert looked at his hands. They were folded in his lap, and he turned them over once like he was examining them for something. "What happened," he said, "is that I made the mistake of going over to their house one night when things got loud. And Marcus, he was good at what he did, I'll give him that. Picked a fight, made sure I threw the first punch, had a lawyer on the phone before I got back to my car." He exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. 2 years in civil court. Cost me everything I had in savings. And when it was over, my daughter was still with him, and I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment and not allowed within 500 feet of my grandchildren. The dental hygienist had called his name before I could ask anything else. He'd stood up, shaken my hand, and that was the last I saw of Robert Haynes. I hadn't connected the dots then. Marcus was a common enough name. His ex-son-in-law had a different last name than Emily's husband, or maybe I'd just never been told it. Whatever the reason, I had sat in that plastic chair and heard a man describe exactly what was happening to my family, and I had filed it away somewhere in the back of my mind under terrible story and gone on with my life. Now I sat in my dark kitchen, and that conversation came back to me with the cold, nauseating clarity of something you should have understood the first time. Marcus picked a fight. Made sure I threw the first punch. Had a lawyer on the phone before I got back to my car. I pressed my palms against the tabletop until I could feel the grain of the wood. He'd done this before. Not once by accident, not once in a blind rage. He had done this deliberately, methodically, to a man who loved his daughter, and he had walked away clean while that man lost everything he'd spent his life building. And now he was doing it again. And I had almost given him exactly what he needed tonight in that living room. My phone buzzed on the table. I'd set it face up out of habit, and the screen lit up the whole kitchen for a second with the brightness of an incoming message. Unknown number. I picked it up. 4 words in the preview, no name attached. You already know. I stared at it for a long moment. The screen went dark. The kitchen went dark with it. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler was still running, still hissing softly into the August night, patient and indifferent. My thumb hovered over the message. Then I set the phone face down on the table. Whoever sent it wanted me rattled. Wanted me up at 1 in the morning, second-guessing myself, jumping at shadows, making a mistake born of fear rather than thought. I wasn't going to give them that. But I also wasn't going to sleep. So I sat there in Margaret's kitchen in the dark, and I started thinking very carefully about tomorrow morning. I drove back to Caldwell Street at 6:50 the next morning. Not because I had a plan, I want to be honest about that. I drove back because something in my chest wouldn't let me stay away, the same instinct that used to wake me up at 3 a.m. when Emily was a teenager and hadn't come home yet. Call it a father's radar. Call it 69 years of learning that the worst things usually happen in the quiet spaces between the dramatic ones. The neighborhood looked different in daylight. Calmer. Somebody's sprinkler was going. A man 2 doors down was rolling his trash bins to the curb in a bathrobe. The morning felt stubbornly, almost offensively ordinary. Marcus answered the door. I was showered, dressed in dark slacks and a collared shirt, a coffee mug in his hand like he'd stepped out of a catalog for functional American masculinity. His jaw was clean-shaved. His hair was combed. If you'd passed him on the street, you'd have thought decent man, early riser, probably coaches, Little League. Mr. Sullivan. He smiled, warm, surprised, utterly convincing. This is early. Come on in. This was the part that frightened me more than the gloves, more than the recording phone, more than anything he'd said at midnight in that dim bedroom. This, the ease of it, the way he flipped the switch. Emily was at the stove scrambling eggs, still in her pajamas. The bruise on her jaw had deepened overnight, gone from reddish-purple to a darker, uglier shade that her hair wasn't quite long enough to hide. She turned when she heard my voice, and her eyes went wide for half a second. Relief and fear mixed together in equal parts, a combination I was getting to know too well. Dad, she said, you didn't have to. I was in the neighborhood. I kissed her on the cheek, careful to stay on the side that wasn't bruised. Her skin was cold even in the warm kitchen. Noah came thundering down the hallway in his socks, sliding the last 3 feet on the hardwood like he was stealing second base. Grandpa. He wrapped both arms around my waist, face buried against my side, and squeezed so hard I could feel every one of his ribs. This boy, this kid who called me at 11 o'clock at night, with a voice like broken glass, and still had enough left in him to slide down hallways in his socks the next morning. He was braver than he knew. I hugged him back hard. You hungry? Marcus asked from the kitchen table, where he'd settled into the chair at the head, naturally, effortlessly, the way a man sits in the seat that's always been his. Emily's making enough for an army. Sit down. I sat. For 20 minutes, it was almost normal. Noah talked about a baseball card he'd been trading for at school. Emily put eggs and toast on the table. Marcus made a joke about the Columbus traffic. He refilled my coffee without being asked. He said please and thank you and called Emily babe with a tone that was almost tender. I watched all of it with the particular attention of a man who knows he's watching a performance, and I ate my eggs and I waited. It was Noah who broke the spell the way children always do, not because they mean to, but because they haven't learned yet to feel the pressure in a room and stay quiet. Grandpa, he said, pushing a piece of toast around his plate. "Can you stay today? We could go to the park. The one with the climbing wall." My heart clenched. I looked at his face, at the hope in it, the simple, uncomplicated need of a 9-year-old who wanted an afternoon that felt safe, and something in my throat tightened. "I'd like that," I said. Noah's whole face lit up. He turned to his mother. "Mom, can we go?" And Emily was already smiling, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen on her face since she was maybe 22 years old. And for one small, perfect second, the kitchen felt like something worth protecting. Then Marcus set his coffee mug down on the table. The sound of it was very deliberate, a quiet click that cut through the conversation like a door closing. "We have plans today," he said. Noah's smile faltered. "We do. You know we do. I told you last week." Marcus looked at Emily. "Didn't I tell you last week?" Emily's hands tightened around her fork. "Marcus, it's Saturday. We don't really—" "Emily." His voice dropped half a register. Not loud. Never loud in the daylight, I was learning. "I told you last week." Her jaw worked. The color rose in her cheeks, not anger worse than anger. The particular flush of a woman swallowing something that deserves to be said because she's already calculated the cost of saying it. "Noah," she said carefully, "maybe another day." "Why does he get to decide?" Noah's voice went up, cracking slightly at the top. "Grandpa came all the way over. It's Saturday. Why do you always let him—" "Noah." Marcus's chair scraped back from the table. He stood up slowly, unhurried, in the way of a man who doesn't need to rush, because the outcome isn't in question. "That's enough. It's not fair." Noah's eyes filled, and he blinked fast, furious at himself for it. "It's never fair. He always—" "I said that is enough." The kitchen went rigid. Noah pressed his lips together so hard they went white. His chin wobbled once violently, and he got it under control, 9 years old, and already learning to get it under control. And that sight, that particular sight, broke something open in my chest that I hadn't felt break since the day Margaret died. Emily turned to her plate, and Marcus looked at her, at the back of her head, at the deliberate way she was staring at her eggs, and something moved across his face. Something cold and calculating that the pleasant morning mask didn't quite cover in time. "I asked you a question," he said. "Marcus, please. I said I told you last week. Yes or no? Did I tell you?" Her voice came out barely above a breath. "Yes, thank you." He reached across the table, not toward the eggs, not toward his coffee. His hand came across fast and flat, and connected with the side of Emily's face with a sound like a bat hitting a ball, sharp and hollow and absolutely final. Emily's head snapped to the side. Her fork clattered against the plate and skipped off the edge of the table. Noah screamed. It was a small sound, high and terrible. The sound of a child whose nervous system just confirmed everything it had been dreading. He knocked his chair back, scrambling away from the table, and he was on his feet and backing against the counter with both hands pressed flat against the cabinets behind him, his eyes huge and swimming. Emily sat completely still with her hand pressed to her cheek, her eyes shut, breathing in short, careful increments through her nose. I was on my feet. I don't remember standing up. The chair was behind me, and I was standing, and the kitchen had gone very quiet and very clear, the way things do when your body has already made a decision and is simply waiting for your mind to catch up. Margaret's voice. "You made me a promise, Jack." I knew. I looked at Emily's face, at her hand trembling against her cheek, at the tear that tracked down the side of her nose without her seeming to notice it. I looked at Noah, pressed against the cabinet chest, heaving, staring at me with eyes that were asking the one question a 9-year-old should never have to ask the adults in his life. Are you going to let this keep happening? Marcus turned to face me. He picked up his coffee mug from the table, completely unhurried, and took a slow sip. And he smiled. There are decisions a man makes in a fraction of a second that he spends the rest of his life either defending or regretting. I want to be honest about what happened next because I've turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since, and I'm still not sure there was another way. Maybe there was. Maybe a smarter man would have found it. But I was standing in that kitchen with my daughter's fork on the floor and my grandson pressed against the cabinets, and the sound of that slap still ringing off the tile walls, and the man who had done it was standing there drinking his coffee like he'd just made a reasonable point in a staff meeting. Emily, my voice came out very quiet. Take Noah and go to his room, right now. Emily lifted her head. Her hand was still pressed to her cheek, and her eyes were glassy with tears. She was refusing to let fall that particular brand of stubborn dignity that she'd had since she was 4 years old, and fell off her bicycle and told me she was fine before I'd even asked. Dad, right now, honey, please. Something in my voice reached her. She pushed back from the table, and she held her hand out to Noah, who crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and grabbed it with both of his squeezing so hard her knuckles went white. She pulled him down the hallway without another word. His door clicked shut. Marcus set his coffee mug on the counter. Just the two of us again, he said pleasantly. Seems to be a pattern. I walked around the kitchen table toward him. Not fast, I've never needed fast. In 30 years of competition, the most dangerous thing I ever learned wasn't speed or power. It was economy. The ability to do exactly as much as was necessary, and nothing more with no wasted motion and no wasted breath. Marcus watched me come and shifted his weight backward half a step, an instinctive retreat that his ego immediately tried to cover by straightening up and widening his stance. His chin went up. His shoulders rolled back. 210 pounds of a man trying to remember why he wasn't afraid. You really want to do this? His voice was still controlled, but there was something new underneath it. A vibration. The first sign of a frequency he hadn't planned for. In my kitchen, you'll go to jail, old man. You understand that the second you touch me. I stepped inside his reach. It's a thing most people don't understand about fighting, that the danger zone isn't up close. It's at arm's length where a big man's power lives, where his reach and his weight give him every advantage. Get inside that distance and the equation changes entirely. Marcus threw his right hand a heavy looping overhand that would have taken my head sideways if it had landed. It didn't land. I was already closer than it was aimed for, rolling my left shoulder inward, so the forearm passed over it, and I drove a short right hand straight up into the hinge of his jaw, just below the ear, with every ounce of weight I had stacked behind it. 40 years of muscle memory doesn't ask permission. Marcus Reed dropped. Not stumbled, not staggered. Dropped straight down, knees first, then sideways, one hand catching the edge of the counter on the way, and pulling a dish towel with it. He hit the kitchen floor on his back and lay there with his eyes open and his chest working in shallow, confused increments, like a man who has just been informed by his body of something his brain hasn't processed yet. I stepped back, both hands open at my sides. I stood there, and I breathed, and I waited to feel something. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. The clean, clarifying satisfaction of a wrong thing being answered. What I felt instead was Margaret's voice, very clear and very close. You promised me, Jack. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Just one. When I opened them, Marcus was still on the floor, and he was smiling, not grimacing, not trying to gather himself, smiling. The corner of his mouth pulled up against the tile, his eyes focusing on the ceiling above him, with the calm, unhurried expression of a man watching a plan come together exactly the way he'd drawn it up. My stomach dropped 6 inches. I looked up. In the far corner of the kitchen, mounted high on the wall above the refrigerator, a small security camera, the kind that runs to a home system, the lens angled down toward the center of the room. The red indicator light pulsed steadily. I thought about the camera angle. I thought about what it could see from up there in the corner, the center of the kitchen, the space near the counter where Marcus had been standing. The approach. The moment of contact. I thought about what it could not see. The table was between the camera and the spot where Emily had been sitting. The slap, the sound that had brought me to my feet had happened on the far side of that table, in the camera's blind spot, below the angle of the lens. The footage would show Marcus standing near the counter. It would show me walking toward him. It would show him throwing a punch that the tight framing might not even capture clearly. And then it would show Marcus going down. That was all it would show. No Emily, with her hand pressed to her bruised cheek. No fork on the floor. No Noah screaming from the cabinet. No 7 years of everything that had led to this moment. Just an old man hitting someone in a kitchen. Marcus's smile widened by a fraction. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," he said, still looking at the ceiling, his voice almost gentle. "You just did exactly what I needed." I stood there, with the weight of that sentence settling over me like cold water, and I understood with a clarity that was almost physical the way you understand a thing when it's too late to do anything about it except learn from it that the fight hadn't been the trap. The fight had been the proof. Marcus was on the floor. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong, and what happened in the next 48 hours changed everything. Before I tell you what I walked into that Monday morning, drop a "still here" in the comments, so I know you're with me. Every single comment means the world. One more thing, the story ahead contains some fictional elements built for storytelling. If that's not for you, no hard feelings, this is a good place to step away. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. The morning was bright and in different sunlight through the oak trees on Birchwood Lane. A kid on a bicycle, somebody's lawn sprinkler arcing lazy rainbows across the sidewalk. The world was going about its business with the cheerful obliviousness of a world that doesn't know what just happened in a kitchen on Caldwell Street. I didn't eat. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and Margaret's photograph on the shelf across the room. And I thought about the camera in the corner above the refrigerator, and the angle it covered, and the exact fraction of the room it could not see. And I thought about Marcus Reed lying on that floor, with his eyes open and smiling. The first call came from Emily at 4:17 that afternoon. "Dad." Her voice was barely above a breath, the kind of quiet you use when you're in a room with someone and you don't want them to hear. "Marcus has been on the phone for the last 2 hours. He keeps walking into the office and closing the door. And I can hear him through the wall. And he keeps saying, man. He keeps saying courthouse and filing and my attorney." My jaw tightened. "Where is he now?" "Office. Doors closed." A pause. "He came out once to get his laptop and he looked like he was in a good mood, Dad. He looked happy. That's what scares me. He looked happy." "Emily, listen to me. Don't engage with him tonight. Don't ask him anything. Don't argue. Take Noah to his room after dinner and stay there." What's going to happen? I wanted to tell her I didn't know. I wanted to tell her the truth, which was that I was 69 years old and I'd just punched her husband in the jaw in front of a security camera, and the man was currently on the phone with his attorney in a good mood, and that combination of facts was not pointing toward anything good. Instead, I said, "I'm handling it. Trust me." She made a sound that might have been a laugh, and might have been a sob, something fragile caught in the space between the two. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad." The call lasted 4 more minutes. When she hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand and watched the light shift across the kitchen floor as the afternoon got older. I called Frank Dalton's number from the contact list. I almost never opened anymore. It rang 3 times. I was preparing for voicemail. Frank picked up. "I'm watching the news right now," he said before I could open my mouth. His voice was gravel and oak, the same voice that had called me kid for a decade and a half, even when I was a full-grown man, the voice I hadn't heard in 3 years, but would have recognized underwater. "Local Columbus station. They've already got something up online. Sullivan assaults son-in-law. There's a clip, Jack. Somebody got it from the home security system, and it's already on social media." My blood went cold. "Frank, are you hurt?" "No." "Is Emily hurt?" "Her jaw is bruised. She's home." "The boy?" "He's okay. He's with her." A pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, steady, measured, the way Frank had always breathed, like a man who decided a long time ago that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "All right," he said. "Tell me what happened. All of it. Don't leave anything out." I told him. The phone call at 11. The drive over. The gloves. The recording phone. The conversation with Marcus about the documents. Going back in the morning. The slap. The 40 seconds. The camera in the corner. The smile. Frank didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a silence of about 4 seconds that felt considerably longer. "He set you up clean," Frank said finally. His voice had gone flat, in the way it used to go flat in the gym when something serious needed to be said, without any cushioning around it. "He's had this ready. The camera position, the lawyer, he had this ready before you walked in the door Friday night." "I know." "The clip they've got online, how much of it shows? I don't know what angle they pulled, but the camera was above the refrigerator. High corner mount. Emily was on the other side of the table when he hit her." Frank exhaled slowly. "So the clip shows you moving and him going down." "That's my read." Another pause. Then, "Jack, you still have my number in the phone." "I'm calling it right now, Frank. I mean the other number, Carol Hayes, the lawyer I told you about 3 years ago when Emily first—" He stopped, adjusted. "When I first got worried." I hadn't known Frank was worried. But then Frank had always known things before I did. It was one of his most useful and most infuriating qualities. "I'll find it," I said. "Call her first thing Monday. Before you do anything else. Before you talk to anybody. Before you respond to anything. Before you open your front door if you don't have to." Monday came faster than I was ready for. I was in the kitchen at 7:15, still in yesterday's clothes, because I hadn't slept enough to bother changing out of them, when the doorbell rang. 2 men on my front porch in Columbus PD uniforms, professional, courteous, the kind of officers who've done this enough times that they've gotten very good at keeping their faces neutral. The older one introduced himself as Officer Dawson. "Mr. Jack Sullivan," he said. "That's me." He held out a folded document, white paper, official header, the weight of the state of Ohio in every crease of it. "Sir, you've been served. Civil summons and a temporary restraining order filed by Marcus Reed through the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas." I took it. My hands didn't shake. I want to be clear about that. 69 years old, and standing on my own front porch, in yesterday's clothes, being served legal papers by a Columbus police officer, and my hands did not shake because shaking wouldn't have helped anything. I unfolded the document and read it. Marcus Reed v. Jack Sullivan. Assault and battery. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Compensatory and punitive damages totaling $2 million. Lion petition against the property at my address on Birchwood Lane. And the one that hit lowest right below the ribs, where a man doesn't have anything solid to protect himself, a motion for temporary restraining order prohibiting Jack Sullivan from any contact, direct or indirect, with Noah Reed, minor child, Noah. The officers waited while I read. When I looked up, Officer Dawson gave me a small, careful nod, not unkind, just professional. "You'll want to consult an attorney, sir," he said. "You have 30 days to respond." I thanked him. I closed the door. At the bottom of the last page, in the signature block, in clean block letters beneath a confident looping signature, Victor M. Kane, SQ, attorney for plaintiff. I tried Emily's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. 4 rings, voicemail. Third time 1 ring, and then a recorded message I'd never heard before. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time." Marcus had blocked my number on her phone. I stood in my hallway, with the summons in one hand, and my phone in the other, and the crooked nail Margaret had hammered into the wall 22 years ago caught my eye, and for one moment, just one, the grief of all of it pressed down so hard, I had to put my hand on the wall to keep my balance. Then I found Carol Hayes's number in my contact list, and I started to make a plan. I've never been a man who needed people to think well of him. 30 years in a boxing ring will cure you of that particular vanity fast, because the crowd cheers when you win, and boos when you lose, and forgets your name inside of 6 months either way. I learned early that reputation is something other people build for you out of whatever material is convenient, and the best you can do is make sure the material is accurate. But there's a difference between not needing approval and watching your name get dragged through a version of events that has been carefully engineered to leave out everything that matters. Wednesday morning, I was at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee when Frank called. "Don't look it up," he said before I could say hello. "Frank, Jack, I'm telling you, don't look it up before you've had your breakfast. Finish your coffee first." I looked it up while the coffee was still in my hand. Columbus Dispatch Online Edition, 8:47 a.m. Retired man assaults son-in-law during family dispute. Victim hospitalized. Below the headline, the security camera footage, 17 seconds of it, tight and clear, showing me cross the kitchen and put Marcus Reed on the floor. No sound. No context. No Emily at the table. No fork on the floor. Just an old man's fist and another man going down. Underneath the clip, a statement from Victor M. Kane, attorney for the plaintiff. "My client sustained a serious jaw injury when he was attacked without provocation in his own home. Mr. Sullivan has demonstrated a troubling propensity for violence toward members of his own family, and we intend to pursue this matter to its fullest extent under Ohio law." Propensity for violence. 3 words. Chosen with the surgical precision of a man who has done this before, specific enough to plant the image, vague enough to avoid a defamation suit. I set my phone face down on the table and sat there with my coffee going cold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the particular helplessness of being accurately described doing something, and having the description be a complete lie at the same time. Frank called back at 9. "I told you not to look," he said. "How bad is it?" "It's local, for now." A pause. "The comments are bad, Jack. People who've never met you are very confident about who you are." "What do I do?" "Nothing." His voice was flat and certain. You do absolutely nothing. You don't post anything. You don't call the paper. You don't leave a voicemail for Victor Kane that you'll regret. You go about your day, and you let Margaret Hayes do her job, and you give these people nothing else to work with. They're calling me Violent Frank, on the internet, with my name attached. I know. His voice shifted softer the way it used to get in the gym when I was 24, and had just taken a bad loss and needed to hear something true. Jack, you've taken harder hits than a newspaper article. Remember that. I went out that afternoon anyway. Needed groceries, the ordinary humiliating persistence of needing to eat even when everything else is falling apart. I drove to the Kroger on Morse Road, where I'd been shopping for 11 years. The woman at the deli counter, whose name I'd never learned, but who always remembered. I liked the turkey sliced thin. She glanced up when I walked in, and then looked back down at her cutting board without saying hello. A man I recognized from the neighborhood, a retired school teacher named Bill, who'd waved to me from his porch 100 times, passed me in the cereal aisle and found something very interesting to examine on the box of granola he was holding until I'd gone by. I paid for my groceries at the self-checkout to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. The teenager monitoring the machines looked at me once, looked at his phone, looked back at me, and then stared very hard at the ceiling. I was 17 years old, and he'd already seen the clip. That night, Frank's number again. Dorothy Marsh called me, he said. Dorothy Marsh, my neighbor on the left, 71 years old, grew dahlias. Along the fence line had given Margaret a cutting of her grandmother's rose bush the year we moved in. Dorothy called you, I said. How does Dorothy have your number? She's had my number since 2019 when she needed someone to talk to about her hip surgery, and you gave it to her because you were in Florida. A pause. She's worried about you. She didn't know how to call you directly after she saw the article, and she didn't know what to think, but she didn't feel right not reaching out. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I pressed my lips together until it passed. Tell her I'm fine, I said. I already did. She didn't believe me. Another pause. She's not the only one who called Jack. I've had 4 calls today from people who know you and don't know what to believe. What did you tell them? I told them to wait. 3 days I stayed inside. I read. I worked in Margaret's garden because the tomatoes didn't care what the Columbus Dispatch had to say about me, and they needed watering, regardless. I called Carol Hayes twice and left messages. I ate cereal for dinner 2 nights running because cooking felt like too much performance for an audience of none. Frank texted every evening. Just check-ins. How are you doing? Have you eaten? Did you sleep? The texts of a man who is 78 years old and has been through enough to know that checking in matters even when there's nothing useful to say. The third night, Thursday past 11, the neighborhood gone quiet, I was sitting on the back porch steps in the dark when I heard it. A sound from the side of the house. Sharp. Explosive. The specific crack of breaking glass. I was on my feet before the echo died. The garage window passenger side, the one that faced the side yard, had a hole in it, the size of a grapefruit, ringed with fracture lines spidering outward through the glass. On the concrete floor inside, surrounded by glittering fragments, sat a chunk of red brick. Old brick, the kind that comes from a crumbling retaining wall, or a demolition site, heavy and purposeful. I stood in the doorway of my own garage with a broken window and a brick on the floor, and I thought about calling the police. Then I thought about what Victor Kane would do with a police report filed by the man currently being sued for assault, how it would look, how it would be framed, how the word escalation would appear in some court document within 48 hours. I went inside and got the broom. I swept up every fragment of glass in the dark, working by the light of my phone, and I put the brick in the trash can, and I went back inside and sat down on the back porch steps again, and looked up at the August sky over Columbus, and felt the full crushing weight of what it means to be completely alone in a situation you cannot punch your way out of. That was when the phone rang. Unknown number. Different from the last unknown number, different area code, different last 4 digits. I picked up, breathing first. Then a voice so small and careful it barely registered as sound. Grandpa, it's me. I'm using Tyler's phone, he's in my class. Don't say my name out loud in case anyone's listening. My chest cracked open like a window hit by a brick. Hey buddy, I managed. I hear you. Grandpa, I have something. I think it's really important, but I don't know what to do with it. The night air had gone still. I pressed the phone so hard against my ear that I could feel my own heartbeat in the cartilage, and I kept my voice as level as I could manage, the same voice I used to use when Noah was 5 and had a nightmare and needed someone to talk him back to solid ground. Tell me, I said. Take your time. Tell me exactly what you have. A breath. The careful, deliberate breath of a 9-year-old organizing his thoughts the way he'd been taught to organize his backpack, one thing at a time, nothing left behind. Friday night, Noah said. When you knocked on the door, I was in the living room. I was supposed to be in my room, but I came out because I heard Mom crying, and I didn't want to be alone. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. That boy. 9 years old, and not wanting to be alone in his room while his mother cried on the other side of the wall. I pressed my free hand flat against my knee to keep it from shaking. Okay, I said. Go on. I saw Dad take his phone and put it on the bookshelf. He turned it a certain way, like he was pointing it at the middle of the room, and I saw the little red light. A pause. I know what that light means because Tyler has the same app on his phone. It means it's recording. I kept my voice even. You saw the light? Yes, sir. And Grandpa, I got scared because I didn't know why Dad was recording. So I picked up my iPad from the floor, and I turned on my camera app. His voice dropped even lower, barely a thread of sound. And I pointed it at the room, and I pressed record. The back porch, the dark yard, the broken garage window, with the brick already in the trash, all of it receded to somewhere far and unimportant, because my grandson was telling me that he had recorded the entire night from the beginning, and I needed to make absolutely sure I understood every word correctly. Noah, I said carefully, when you say you pressed record, how long did you keep it running? The whole time. He said it simply the way kids say things that turn out to be enormously consequential. I kept it in my lap. I didn't move it around too much because I didn't want Dad to see. And then when Mom came to get me and take me to the bedroom, I didn't turn it off. I kept it running in my lap until she closed the door. I put my hand over my mouth for a moment. Just a moment. So the video starts from when I knocked on the door, I said. Before that, actually, I already had the app open. You can see the front door and the living room, and Grandpa, you can see Dad put his phone on the shelf. You can see the light. The magnitude of what he was telling me was still expanding, like a sound wave moving outward from an impact, getting larger the further it traveled. The recording on Marcus's phone only showed what Marcus chose to show. But Noah's iPad, if it had captured what Noah was describing, would show everything Marcus's camera was designed to hide. Where is the iPad right now? I asked. In my backpack. The blue one with the patch on the zipper. I put it at the very bottom under my library books. A tiny pause. Dad doesn't look in my backpack. He says that's beneath him. God. Even in the middle of all, Marcus Reed's arrogance was doing my work for me. Have you opened the video since you recorded it? I asked. Have you played it back? No. His voice went up slightly urgent. That's why I called you. Tyler told me that on iPads when you watch a video, it shows up in the recently played thing. And if Dad ever looked at my iPad and saw a video from Friday night in the middle of the night. He stopped. The thought finished itself. 9 years old. This child was 9 years old, and he was thinking about metadata and viewing history and the risk of evidence discovery, and he hadn't told a single person for 4 days because he was trying to protect it. Noah, I said, and my voice came out rough at the edges in a way I couldn't entirely control. You did exactly right. You did everything right. Is it going to help? His voice cracked on the last word, just barely, just enough to let the fear underneath it show through. Grandpa, is it going to help you? Because everyone at school is saying Tyler showed me the news thing online, and they're saying. He stopped, and I heard him pull in a breath that shook on the way in. They're saying bad stuff about you, and it's not true, and I have the video that proves it, and I didn't know what to do. Hey. I kept my voice steady, even though my chest felt like it was being wrung out like a wet cloth. Hey, look at me. You can't see me, but look at me anyway. A small, watery laugh. Okay. You called the right person. You did the smart thing, keeping it safe. And yes, what you have is going to help. More than you know. I let that settle for a second. But I need you to do 3 things for me. Can you do 3 things? Yes, sir. Don't open the video. Don't play it back for any reason. Okay. Don't delete it. Don't let anyone borrow your iPad. Don't let anyone scroll through your photos. Okay. And don't tell anyone you have it. Not your mom yet, not until I've talked to someone first. Not Tyler, even though he's been good to you. Nobody. Can you do that? The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I felt the first edge of worry, and then, is Mom going to be okay? The question hit me somewhere right behind the sternum, in the place where a father keeps the things he can't protect his children from knowing. I'm going to do everything I can, I said. That's all I can promise you. But I'm going to do everything I can, and what you just told me tonight, that changes things, Noah. That changes a lot of things. Another pause. Then very quietly, Grandpa, are you coming? Are you going to come back? I looked up at the August sky above my backyard. The same sky Margaret used to point at when she was teaching Emily to find Orion years and years ago, the 2 of them lying in the grass with their heads together. I'm coming, I said. I just have to figure out how. After we hung up, I sat on that porch step for a long time. The neighborhood was quiet. The garage window was broken. My name was in the newspaper, and not one word of the story was true. And somewhere 3 miles away, buried under library books, in a blue backpack, with a patch on the zipper, was the truth. Every second of it unedited and undisturbed, kept safe by the steadiest hands in the whole situation. They happened to be 9 years old. I went inside, turned on the kitchen light, and called Carol Hayes for the 3rd time. This time she picked up on the 2nd ring. I was expecting your call, she said. I have something, I told her. I think it changes everything. Carol Hayes's office was on the 4th floor of a building on North High Street. The kind of office that told you something about the person who worked in it before she opened her mouth. No framed diplomas on the wall. No glossy furniture chosen to impress clients. Just 2 chairs, a desk with actual work on it. A window that looked out over a stretch of Columbus oak trees, turning gold at the edges, and on the corner of the desk, a small framed photo of two teenage girls in soccer uniforms grinning at the camera like they'd just won something. Carol Hayes herself was 52 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of eyes that made you feel like she'd already calculated 3 possible outcomes before you finished your first sentence. Frank had described her to me 3 years ago as the best family law attorney in Franklin County, and possibly the most patient human being I have ever met. Looking at her now, I believed both things. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a carafe on the credenza. Didn't ask if I wanted any, just set one in front of me and sat down across the desk and said, "Tell me everything. Don't edit it. Don't decide what's relevant. Just tell me." So I did. I told her about the phone call at 11 on a Friday night, and the drive over and the beer can that never got lighter. I told her about the gloves and the recording phone and the conversation about the documents and the safe. I told her about Robert Haynes in the dental office waiting room. I told her about going back Saturday morning and the breakfast that looked normal until it didn't, and the sound of that slap off the kitchen tile. I told her about 40 seconds and a camera in the corner above the refrigerator and a man lying on the floor with his eyes open and smiling. Carol didn't write anything down while I talked. She just watched me with those steady eyes, one hand wrapped around her coffee cup, and when I finished, she asked exactly 3 questions. "Besides you, is there anyone else who witnessed what happened in that kitchen on Saturday morning?" "Emily and Noah," I said. "Emily is his wife. Noah is 9. She nodded. "What does the security camera footage actually show?" "Me crossing the kitchen and hitting him. The table was between the camera and where Emily was sitting when he struck her. The camera angle doesn't cover that part of the room." Another nod. Then quietly, "And your grandson. You said he had something." I leaned forward in my chair. "He had his iPad. He saw Marcus set up the recording on his phone, saw the red light, and he got scared, so he opened his camera app and recorded the room himself. He says he started before I knocked and ran it until Emily took him to the bedroom." Carol set her coffee cup down very precisely on the desk. The small, controlled movement of a woman who has just heard something significant and is taking 1 second to absorb it properly. "If that video shows what Noah described," she said, "it is the only piece of evidence that can contextualize everything else. Marcus's setup, the gloves, him striking Emily, all of it." She paused. "But we have a problem. You are under a temporary restraining order that prohibits contact with Noah. If you approach him to retrieve that iPad, even with the best intentions, Marcus will use it to argue you violated the order, and we lose the moral high ground we desperately need." My jaw tightened. "So how do we get it?" we asked the court. She folded her hands on the desk. "I can file a motion to preserve electronic evidence. It's a standard legal tool that asks the court to protect specific devices from being altered or destroyed while a case is pending. If the judge grants it, the iPad gets collected by the court, not by you, and the chain of custody is airtight." "How long does that take?" "Depends on the judge. Days, potentially. We need to move fast." She looked at me directly. "But here's the harder question, Jack. To support that motion, we need Noah to tell the court himself what he has. A sworn statement or testimony, which means—" She held my gaze. "Are you willing to put your 9-year-old grandson in front of a judge?" The question landed like something physical. I thought about Noah on the phone, his voice barely a thread, so careful not to be heard. I thought about him keeping that iPad hidden for 4 days alone, not telling anyone, carrying it like a secret that weighed more than he should have had to carry at 9 years old. "That's not my call to make alone," I said. "I need to talk to Emily." "I know." Margaret opened a drawer and produced a legal pad. "I'll reach out to her directly." You can't the order, but I can. I met Frank 2 hours later at a place called Morty's Diner on Morrison Road, a booth in the back corner where the vinyl seats were patched with electrical tape, and the coffee was terrible and magnificent at the same time. Frank was already there when I arrived, sitting straight-backed in the booth with a canvas bag on the seat beside him, working through a slice of apple pie with the focused dedication of a man who has earned the right to eat pie at 11 in the morning. I was 78 years old, and he looked it, the hair gone completely white, the face mapped with the kind of lines that come from decades of expression rather than just age. But his back was straight as a telephone pole, and his eyes were the same eyes that had looked at me across a boxing gym in 1987 and seen something worth training. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting. "Thank you, Frank." I slid into the booth across from him. "What's in the bag?" He patted the canvas bag with one hand. "Something for later." "Frank, eat something first. You look like you haven't slept." I ordered coffee and a piece of toast I didn't eat, and I told him about Carol Hayes, and the motion to preserve evidence, and the question about Noah testifying. Frank listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, the rare considered quiet of a man choosing his words. "She's right about the motion," he said, "and she's right about Noah." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "That boy called you at 11 o'clock at night and kept a secret for 4 days that most adults couldn't have kept for 4 hours. He can handle a courtroom. He's 9, Frank. I know how old he is." Frank looked at me steadily. "How old were you the first time you did something that scared you half to death because someone you loved needed you to?" I didn't answer that. He knew the answer already. Frank reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a long, flat object wrapped in a cloth that had clearly been folded and refolded many times. He set it on the table between us. I knew what it was before he unwrapped it. The belt was real leather gone soft with age, the gold plate tarnished to a dull amber. My name was still on it, engraved in block letters that had blurred slightly at the edges over 35 years. Beside it, Frank laid a manila folder inside newspaper clippings, carefully preserved, their edges yellowed and brittle. "Frank," I looked up at him, "you cannot bring this into a courtroom. I'm not asking your permission." He said it pleasantly, the way he used to tell me to do a 10th round when I was sure I had nothing left. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You handle your part. Let me handle mine. It'll backfire. Victor Kane will use it. Maybe." He folded the cloth back over the belt with deliberate care. "Or maybe a 78-year-old man walking into a courtroom with a championship belt has a different effect than you're imagining." He tucked the bag beside him and picked up his fork and went back to his pie. I stared at him across the table, trying to read something in the absolute tranquility of his expression, and found nothing I could argue with. My phone buzzed. Email from Carol Hayes. "Victor Kane filed a supplemental brief this afternoon. He has new evidence. Meet me first thing tomorrow morning." Carol had the laptop open when I walked in at 8 the next morning. No coffee this time. She was already standing behind her desk, one hand braced on the surface, eyes on the screen with the focused intensity of someone who had been staring at the same thing for a while and was still not happy about what she was seeing. "Close the door," she said. I closed it. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. "Sit down, Jack." She waited until I was in the chair. "I want you to watch this, and I want you to watch it all the way through before you say anything." She turned the laptop toward me. The footage was in color, good resolution, better than I'd expected from a home security system. Wide-angle kitchen perspective. The camera mounted high in the corner above the refrigerator, exactly where I remembered it. A timestamp ran in the lower left corner, 08:17:43 a.m., August 16, 2025. I watched myself walk around the kitchen table. Watched myself close the distance to Marcus. Watched Marcus throw a punch that missed. Watched my right hand connect with his jaw. Watched him go down. The whole sequence took 11 seconds of footage. 11 seconds with no sound, no context, no Emily at the table, no Noah against the cabinet. Just a man in his late 60s crossing a kitchen and hitting someone 20 years younger than him. 11 seconds that without anything else looked exactly like what Victor Kane was going to say it looked like. Carol closed the laptop. Victor submitted this to the court yesterday afternoon, along with a supplemental brief, she said. She came around to the front of the desk and leaned against it, arms crossed, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. His argument is straightforward. The footage shows an unprovoked attack. No prior altercation visible, no defensive posturing from Marcus, no indication of any threat that would justify what happens next. Just a man walking in and hitting someone. Because the camera doesn't cover the part of the room where Marcus hit Emily, I said. I know that. You know that. The camera doesn't know that. She picked up a printed copy of Victor's brief from the desk and set it in front of me. He's going to play this clip on a screen in that courtroom and let 45 seconds of silence do his work for him. Juries don't need narration when the picture is that clear. I looked at the printout without picking it up. The words blurred slightly at the edges, not from emotion, just from the particular exhaustion of a man who has been reading bad news for 2 weeks straight. So what do we have? I asked. Right now. She exhaled slowly. We have your account of what happened, which is uncorroborated. We have Emily's account, which Victor will argue is compromised by loyalty. And we have the iPad. She held my gaze. That's it. That's our entire case, Jack. Everything else is noise. Then we need the iPad. Yes. She pushed off the desk and moved to the window, looking out at the oak trees on High Street. 2 of them had started to turn patches of orange and yellow, visible through the glass, the first real sign that summer was giving up. I filed the motion to preserve electronic evidence this morning. Judge Patricia Holloway is assigned to this case. She's methodical, she's fair, and she does not like wasted time. If the motion is granted, the iPad gets surrendered to the court's custody within 72 hours. And if Marcus finds it first? She turned from the window. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a tightening, a controlled acknowledgement of the thing neither of us wanted to say out loud. Then we have nothing, she said. Which is why I need to reach Emily today. She picked up her phone from the desk, not asking, just moving the way decisive people move, and dialed. I sat in the chair and watched the oak trees through the window and felt every one of my 69 years pressing down through the chair into the floor. 4 rings. My pulse climbed with each one. Then the call connected. A voice thin, barely above a murmur, the voice of a woman speaking from somewhere she couldn't be overheard. Hello? Emily Sullivan. Carol's voice shifted into a register I hadn't heard from her yet, and careful, unhurried. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm an attorney here in Columbus. I'm calling because your father asked me to reach out. Is this a safe time to talk? A pause, long enough that my chest tightened. Then Emily's voice came back slightly stronger. He found me a lawyer. He found you someone who wants to help. That's all. Another pause. I could hear Emily breathing through the phone, slow and deliberate, the breath of someone making a decision. What do you need to know? She asked. Carol walked her through it carefully, methodically, no pressure in her voice. The iPad. Noah. The motion. What Emily would need to do to support it. Emily listened. When Carol finished, there was a silence of about 5 seconds. "She'll do it," Carol said, looking at me. "And Jack?" She held the phone slightly away, and her eyes sharpened. "She says there's something else. Something she hasn't told you yet." A beat. "She says it's about her mother-in-law." I straightened in my chair. "What about her?" I asked. Carol put the phone back to her ear. "Emily, can you tell me a little more about that?" She listened for 30 seconds, her expression going very still, in the way it had gone still when I first mentioned the iPad. Then she looked up at me with something new in her eyes, not alarm exactly, but the particular alertness of a lawyer who has just been handed a piece she didn't know was missing. "We need to meet in person," she told Emily, "as soon as possible." Franklin County Court of Common Pleas smelled like old wood and recycled air, and the particular kind of tension that lives in rooms where people come to settle things they can't settle anywhere else. I'd been in a lot of difficult rooms in my life. Locker rooms before fights I wasn't sure I'd win, hospital waiting rooms, the room where the funeral director told me what Margaret's arrangements would cost. And I sat there not hearing any of it. But walking through those courtroom doors on the morning of September 10th in a navy blazer that Margaret had specifically told me to buy, not a suit, not casual, something that says you respect the process without looking like you're trying too hard, was a different kind of difficult. It was the kind that requires you to sit down calmly in a chair while someone else controls what happens next. Marcus was already at the plaintiff's table when I came in. He wore a white suit that probably cost more than my first car, and his right wrist had a narrow bandage wrapped around it, with the precision of something applied for maximum visibility. 3 weeks since that morning in the kitchen. The wrist looked fine. The bandage was not for the wrist. He didn't look at me when I sat down. He was too busy leaning toward Victor Kane with an expression of grave theatrical concern, like a man being interviewed for a documentary about his own suffering. Victor Kane in person was exactly what I'd expected from his press statements. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, the kind of tailored composure that comes from decades of making a living in rooms like this one. He arranged his papers with unhurried confidence. He didn't glance at our table once. Carol sat beside me and put her hand briefly on my forearm. "Don't react to anything Victor says," she murmured. "Whatever he puts on that screen, whatever words he uses, your face stays neutral. You're not angry, you're not worried, you're not vindicated. You're just a man who came here to tell the truth." "Understood," I said. Judge Patricia Holloway entered at 9:05, a woman in her late 50s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the efficient, no-nonsense bearing of someone who had heard every possible version of human conflict and was still willing to listen to one more. She called the room to order with a single strike of her gavel, reviewed the case number, and nodded to Victor. "Mr. Kane, you may proceed." Victor stood with the ease of a man who enjoys this part. He walked the judge through the security footage first, same 17 seconds I'd watched in Margaret's office, same high corner angle, same complete absence of context. He described my background with careful vagueness, a physically capable individual with a documented history of confrontational behavior. He described Marcus's injuries with elaborate precision, the jaw contusion, the soft tissue damage, the ongoing difficulty, chewing solid food, at which point Marcus touched his jaw with 2 fingers in a gesture of gentle suffering that made my back teeth grind together. I kept my face neutral. I thought about Margaret's hand on my forearm, and I kept my face completely neutral. Then Carol stood up. She was calm, the way deep water is calm, not still, but with a weight and depth beneath the surface that made you understand the current was there, whether you could see it or not. She addressed the judge directly, methodically, point by point, The documented pattern of physical abuse against Emily Sullivan spanning 7 years. The financial control and document withholding established by Marcus Reed's own statements. The critical gap in the security footage's coverage and the fact that her client had acted to protect his daughter from an ongoing and escalating threat. Then she said, "Your Honor, we have reason to believe there is additional electronic evidence that documents the full sequence of events on the morning in question. Evidence that the current security footage does not capture. We are asking this court to issue an order to preserve and collect a specific electronic device before it can be altered or destroyed." Victor was on his feet before she finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is asking for the preservation order based on the unsubstantiated claim that some unspecified device exists somewhere. There is no evidence of this evidence." Judge Holloway looked at Margaret over her glasses. "Ms. Hayes, what is the basis for this request?" "Your Honor, we have a witness who can testify directly to the existence and content of this recording. We are prepared to present that witness." "I'll hear that testimony in the next session," Judge Holloway said. "Both counsel will submit supplemental written arguments by 8 a.m. tomorrow. We'll reconvene at 9. She struck the gavel. "We're in recess." The room began to exhale. I stood up slowly, shoulders tight, from 2 hours of enforced stillness, and that's when I saw him. Frank was in the third row of the public gallery on the aisle seat, as if he'd been sitting there the whole time and had just been waiting for me to look. He was holding the canvas bag on his lap with both hands. When our eyes met, he gave me one small nod, the same nod he used to give me in the corner between rounds, when words would have taken too long. "Frank," I said as soon as I reached him in the hallway, "how long have you been here?" "Since 8:30. He stood up from the bench, the canvas bag over one arm. "I spoke to Ms. Hayes before the session. She agreed to call me as a character witness in the afternoon." "Frank, it needed to be done, Jack." He said it quietly, without apology. "Victor Kane spent 2 hours painting a picture of you as a violent man. I am the only person in this building who can tell that room who you actually are, and I intend to do that." I unzipped the canvas bag and showed me the edge of the leather belt, the gold plate catching the hallway light, for just a second before he closed it again. I pressed my lips together hard, held it for 3 full seconds. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay, Frank." The afternoon session was different. Frank took the stand with the calm deliberateness of a man who has done harder things than sit in a chair and tell the truth. He stated his name, his profession, retired boxing trainer, 40 years experience, and his relationship to me. Then Carol asked him to describe in his own words what he knew about Jack Sullivan. Frank talked for 12 minutes. He didn't embellish. He didn't perform. He just told the truth in a flat, matter-of-fact voice that carried across the courtroom, like he was talking to one person instead of 40. He talked about the championship, about the years of training, about the night I retired, and what I said when I walked out of the gym for the last time, about the promise I'd made and the 35 years I'd kept it. Then he reached into the canvas bag and placed the championship belt on the railing of the witness stand. The courtroom went so quiet I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Marcus, for the first time since I'd walked into that room, stopped performing. He looked at the belt, the tarnished gold plate, the name engraved in letters that hadn't faded, and then he looked at me. And in his eyes, behind all the calculation and the theater and the careful construction of victimhood, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Recognition, the kind that comes too late. He leaned toward Victor and said something in a low, fast voice. Victor's expression shifted, not much, just a degree or two, but enough to see that he'd been handed something he hadn't had this morning. his mouth curved up at the corner, the barest fraction of a smile. The hallway outside the courtroom felt narrower than it had that morning. Carol walked beside me toward the elevator, her heels sharp and precise on the marble floor, her face doing the thing it did when she was working through something she hadn't finished calculating yet. I'd learned to read that expression over the past 2 weeks, the slight compression of her lips, the way her eyes moved fractionally left when her mind was running ahead of her words. "He's going to use it," I said. "I know." She pressed the elevator button. "Victor's good. He saw it the second Frank put that belt on the railing." A pause. "We have 30 minutes before the afternoon session. Let's use them." We used the conference room Carol had reserved on the second floor, a small fluorescent-lit space with a rectangular table and 4 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the parking garage. She spread her notes across the table and stood at the end of it, arms crossed, and looked at me with the expression she reserved for things that needed to be said directly. "Here's what Victor is going to argue," she said. "And I need you to hear it clearly so you're not blindsided when he says it in front of the judge." She took a breath. A layperson who strikes someone in a moment of emotional reaction might reasonably claim they didn't understand the potential consequences. But a trained boxer, a former heavyweight champion, cannot make that argument. The law recognizes what's called heightened duty of care. It means that someone with specialized skills or knowledge is held to a higher standard than the average person. Victor is going to stand up in that courtroom and say that you, of all people, knew exactly how dangerous your fist was, that your action wasn't impulsive, it was expert, and that makes it worse, not better. The words landed in my chest like something cold and heavy. "Can he make that argument stick?" I asked. Carol's jaw tightened. In Ohio, the restatement of torts supports exactly that standard. A professional athlete, a surgeon, a trained martial artist, they can all be held to the standard of their expertise, not the standard of a reasonable, untrained person. She pulled out a chair and sat down, pressing her palms flat on the table. "It's not an insurmountable argument, but it's not nothing." Victor's afternoon presentation was worse than Carol had described, because he delivered it with the unhurried confidence of a man who had been waiting all morning for permission to use his best material. He stood before Judge Holloway and spoke for 20 minutes, and every sentence was a blade turned in a new direction. He cited case law. He cited the championship record Frank had so helpfully put into the court record just an hour earlier. He used the phrase, calculated application of lethal force, twice, and each time he said it. Marcus touched his bandaged wrist with the delicate care of a man tending a wound he expected to carry for the rest of his life. "Your Honor," Victor said in conclusion, "the defense will ask this court to believe that Jack Sullivan acted out of instinct, out of fear, out of the desperate improvisation of an ordinary man in an impossible situation. But Jack Sullivan is not an ordinary man. He is a trained fighter, a former national champion, a man who spent decades developing the precise ability to incapacitate another human being with a single blow. When Jack Sullivan strikes someone, it is not an accident. It is not a reflex. It is expertise. And expertise carries responsibility." Judge Holloway made a note. She looked at Margaret. "Ms. Hayes." "Response." Margaret stood. Her voice was steady, but I'd been sitting beside her long enough to hear the difference from this morning. A fraction more careful, a fraction more deliberate, like a musician playing a difficult passage at a tempo she wasn't entirely sure of. She argued self-defense. She argued provocation. She argued that the duty of care argument, while legally grounded, did not account for the circumstances that initiated the confrontation. Judge Holloway listened to all of it with her reading glasses in her hand, turning them slowly by one temple. When Margaret finished, the judge set the glasses on the bench. I'm going to need written arguments from both sides on the duty of care question by 8 a.m. tomorrow, she said. We'll hear the additional witness testimony first thing. Her eyes moved to Margaret. Ms. Hayes, your witness will be present. Yes, Your Honor. The gavel came down. In the hallway afterward, Frank was waiting on the same bench where I'd found him at noon. He stood when he saw me coming, and his face told me he already knew he'd been in the gallery for Victor's entire afternoon presentation. Frank, my voice came out rougher than I intended. I told you he'd find a way to use it. Frank took that. He didn't deflect it, didn't argue. His chin dropped slightly, the particular posture of a man accepting weight he knows he earned. I didn't think he'd move that fast, he said. I thought the belt would read as character. I didn't think it would read as ammunition. It read as both. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose. That's the problem. I know. He looked up and his eyes were raw in a way I hadn't seen from Frank Dalton in 40 years of knowing him. Jack, I'm sorry. I thought I was helping. Something in my chest shifted at that. Frank had walked into that courtroom at 78 years old, with an old belt and a folder of newspaper clippings, because he believed in me enough to show up when it cost him something. The fact that it had cut both ways didn't change what it was. You were helping, I said. You just gave Victor something to work with at the same time. I dropped my hand from my face. We'll fix it tomorrow. How? The iPad. I said it the way Margaret had said it earlier, with the certainty of something that has no alternative. Everything comes down to the iPad. If Noah's footage shows what he described, Victor's whole argument collapses. It doesn't matter how good my right hand is if the video proves I used it in response to a man hitting my daughter. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, is the boy going to be there tomorrow? I looked at my phone. The message from Tyler's number had come in at 6:47 p.m. while I was still in Margaret's conference room. 3 words. I'll be there. He'll be there, I said. Margaret appeared at the end of the hallway, coat over her arm, briefcase in hand. She looked at both of us and then said without preamble, 14 hours, that's what we have. I'll be at the office until midnight if either of you think of anything useful. She walked toward the elevator. I looked at Frank. He straightened his back, that telephone pole posture still there at 78, still refusing to give an inch, and picked up his canvas bag. Get some sleep, Jack, he said. Tomorrow you're going to need everything you've got. I rode the elevator down alone. The lobby of the Franklin County Courthouse was mostly empty by then, the marble floors reflecting the overhead lights in long, pale streaks. I walked through the front doors into the September evening and stood on the steps for a moment, breathing the cooler air, and I thought about a 9-year-old boy who had just told me he was coming. Whatever happened in that courtroom tomorrow, Noah Sullivan was going to walk into it. And I was going to make sure he didn't walk out of it having done it for nothing. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers until 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, with Margaret's voice in my head, and Victor's voice in my head, and the September darkness pressing down through the window, and sometime around 4:15 I gave up, got up, and made coffee I didn't need, and sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside started to lighten at the edges. At 6:30, I put on the navy blazer again, picked up my keys, and drove to the Franklin County Courthouse. Noah was already there. I was sitting in the 3rd row of the public gallery, the same row where Frank had sat the morning before with his backpack on his lap instead of his back, both arms wrapped around it, his sneakers not quite reaching the floor. He was wearing his school clothes, dark jeans, a green polo shirt that was slightly too big for him at the shoulders, his hair combed flat in the way that only happens when a parent has done it rather than the child. Emily must have brought him. I looked around the gallery and found her 2 seats down, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. When Noah saw me, he lifted one hand in a small wave, just his fingers. His chin was steady and his eyes were clear, and something about that particular combination, the steadiness and the clarity, in a 9-year-old face in a courtroom at 8:50 in the morning, made my throat close so completely I had to look away for a moment and breathe. That boy, I thought. That extraordinary boy. Carol appeared at my elbow. "He's ready," she said quietly. "I spoke to him and Emily for 40 minutes yesterday evening. He knows what to expect. He knows what I'm going to ask." She looked at me directly. "Are you ready?" "Ask me again in an hour," I said. Judge Holloway called the session to order at 9 on the dot. Victor presented his overnight brief on the duty of care argument, polished, thorough, the work of a man who had not slept either, but had used the hours more productively than I had. Margaret countered with equal precision. The judge listened to both sides with her reading glasses in her hand, turning them in the same slow rotation I'd noticed yesterday. Then Carol stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Noah Sullivan as a witness." Victor was on his feet instantly. "Objection. The witness is a minor of 9 years. The court has not established competency, and calling a child to testify in a proceeding of this nature raises significant concerns about emotional impact and, Mr. Kane." Judge Holloway's voice was quiet but absolute, the kind of quiet that ends sentences. "I am aware of my obligations regarding minor witnesses. I will make that determination myself." She looked towards the gallery. "Is Noah Sullivan present?" Noah stood up. He didn't raise his hand. He just stood up, straight-backed, chin level, the backpack held against his chest with both arms. "Come forward, please," the judge said. He walked down the aisle and through the gate with the careful, deliberate steps of someone who has decided to be brave and is executing that decision 1 footfall at a time. He climbed into the witness chair. It was too tall for him, his feet dangling 4 inches off the floor, and looked at Judge Holloway without flinching. The judge leaned forward slightly. When she spoke to him, her voice dropped, not to condescension, but to the register people use when they want to make sure they're being understood. "Noah, do you know why we ask people in this room to tell the truth?" "Because lying hurts people," Noah said. "And because you can't fix a problem if nobody says what actually happened." Judge Holloway held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she sat back. "You may proceed, Ms. Hayes." Carol approached the witness stand. "The way you approach something fragile and important, carefully, without hurry." She asked him his name, his age, whether he'd been at home on the night of August 15th. Noah answered each question clearly and completely, his voice steady, his eyes on Margaret's face. Then she said, "Noah, can you tell the court what you saw your father do with his phone that night?" And Noah told it. He told it the same way he'd told it to me, on the back porch, in order, without embellishment, with the particular precision of a child who has been carrying a true story for 3 weeks and is finally allowed to set it down. He described the red light. He described opening his own camera app. He described holding the iPad in his lap, keeping it still, keeping it running. "When did you start recording, Noah?" Margaret asked. "Before my grandpa knocked on the door," he said. "I already had the app open." "And when did you stop?" "When my mom closed the bedroom door." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the boy breathing. Carol looked at Judge Holloway. "Your Honor, the witness states he has a video recording of the events of that evening stored on his iPad currently in his backpack. We request the court take custody of the device for immediate review." Victor surged to his feet. "Objection, chain of custody has not been established. The device has not been authenticated. The footage has not been Mr. Kane. The judge's gavel came down once. The device will be surrendered to the court officer. We will take a 15-minute recess while it is connected to the display system. The 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. When the screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life, the footage was grainy and low-angle. The view from a 9-year-old's lap slightly tilted the living room visible in the wide shot. But it was clear enough. It was more than clear enough. The room watched Marcus Reed set his phone against the bookshelf, watched the red indicator light, watched him reach into the gym bag, watched the gloves land on the floor. Heard for the first time because Noah's iPad had a microphone, unlike the security camera. Heard Marcus's voice saying, "Let's stop pretending." And then the room heard the crack of a hand against a face. And then Noah's voice, high and broken, screaming, "Mom!" Every person in that courtroom heard it. Victor Kane sat down. He didn't say anything. He just sat down, and the folder of papers in front of him might as well have been blank. Marcus was looking at the screen. His face had gone the color of old chalk. The theatrical bandage on his wrist, the careful suit, the performance of victimhood he had been constructing for 3 weeks, all of it sat on him like a costume he had suddenly forgotten the purpose of. "Mr. Kane," Judge Holloway said, her voice precisely level, "does your client wish to withdraw the complaint?" Victor leaned toward Marcus. Marcus's jaw worked. 1 second, 3 seconds, 5. Then he gave one small nod. I turned toward the gallery. Noah was still in the witness chair watching me. His face had opened up into something I hadn't seen since before any of this began, something light and unguarded and relieved, the expression of a child who has been holding something very heavy and has just been allowed to put it down. He smiled at me, slow and tired and real, and over his shoulder, in the back row of the gallery, a woman I had never seen before was rising from her seat. Straight-backed, unhurried, expensively dressed. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at Emily. And then she walked out. The Columbus police officers were waiting in the hallway when Marcus came out of the courtroom. 2 of them professional, quiet, the kind of officers who have done this enough times that they don't need to raise their voices. One of them said Marcus's name. Marcus stopped walking. His face cycled through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds: confusion, calculation, and then a particular blankness that comes when a man realizes the play he's been running has just run out of board. They'd watched the footage, the audio, the crack of the slap, Noah's voice. Emily's cry had been enough. Victor Kane walked past without a word. He didn't look at Marcus. He had his briefcase in one hand and his jacket over his arm, and the expression of a man who has already mentally moved on to the next case because this one was done and done badly, and the best thing to do with a loss like that is put it behind you as efficiently as possible. Emily stood in the hallway with both hands pressed over her mouth, tears running freely down her face, not crying. The way people cry from sadness, but the way they cry when something that has been pressing down on them for a very long time has just finally been lifted. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in uneven pulls, and when Noah pushed through the courtroom door and saw her, he ran to her and threw his arms around her waist and buried his face against her side, and she folded herself around him and held on. I stood a few feet away and let them have that moment. My own eyes were burning in a way I hadn't let myself acknowledge all morning, and I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and looked at the ceiling until it passed. Carol appeared beside me. "The TRO is dissolved as of the dismissal," she said quietly. "You can see them, freely, starting right now." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice quite yet. "Frank called that evening just after 7. I saw the afternoon news," he said. Columbus Dispatch ran a correction. It wasn't big, but it was there. Dorothy called me, I told him. The neighbor, 71 years old, the dahlias along the fence, had shown up at my door at 4:30 that afternoon with a foil-covered casserole dish and her eyes full of apology. She'd stood on my porch and said, "Jack, I am so sorry I doubted you," in a voice that cracked on the last word, and I had told her she was the most decent person on Birchwood Lane, and invited her in for coffee, and she had cried a little into her cup, and that had been exactly what both of us needed. "Good," Frank said. "She's a good woman." "She is." A pause. "Frank, what you did in that courtroom, with the belt. I know it made things harder for a day. It also made it impossible for Victor to argue. I didn't know what I was doing, which ended up being less important than we thought because of Noah." I heard him start to say something, and I kept going. "You showed up, Frank. At 78 years old, you showed up with that ridiculous belt and those old newspapers, and you sat in that gallery for 2 days. That matters. It matters more than the strategy." A long pause on the other end. When Frank spoke again, his voice was rougher than usual. "That boy," he said, 9 years old. "I know. You should be proud of him, Jack." "Every day," I said. "Every single day." 2 days later, the Ohio Amateur MMA Association sent Marcus Reed a formal letter. The organization's ethics board had reviewed the courtroom footage and voted unanimously. Marcus Reed was banned from competing in any sanctioned event under their jurisdiction, effective immediately and permanently for conduct unbecoming a competitor and for misuse of the legal system to suppress evidence of domestic violence. 3 gyms in Columbus quietly revoked his membership the same week. I drove to Caldwell Street the following Saturday, the first time I'd been there, without the weight of a restraining order pressing down on every minute. Emily opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching for my car. She looked different. Not healed, that would take longer than 2 weeks, but lighter in some fundamental way, like a woman who has set down a bag she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. We sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, and Noah was in his room doing homework with the door cracked open, and the house felt like a house again, instead of a place someone had turned into a trap. Then Emily wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she used when she was about to say something she'd been working up to. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you about Marcus's mother." I set my cup down. "Go ahead." "The woman in the courtroom, the one who left before the verdict." Emily's jaw tightened. "That was Diane Reed, Marcus's mother." She paused. "Dad, she's the one who taught him how to do all of this. The documents, the isolation, and the financial control. She did it to Marcus's father for 20 years, and then she taught Marcus to do it to me." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she pressed her lips together, fighting it back. "Marcus didn't invent any of it. He learned it from her." The kitchen felt very still. Outside, a car passed on Caldwell Street. Noah's pencil scratched faintly against paper in the other room. I thought about the woman who had walked out of that gallery, the straight back, the unhurried step, the way she had looked at Emily and not at her own son as he was being led away by police. Not grief, not shock, calculation. "Has she contacted you?" I asked. Emily's fingers tightened around the mug. "She called me yesterday. She said she wants to meet. Said she wants to make things right. Said she feels terrible about what Marcus did." A pause, weighted and careful. "She sounded very convincing, Dad." The words landed like something I'd heard before, in a different kitchen, from a different mouth, with a different expression. "I'm just a practical man, Mr. Sullivan." "Emily," I said, "don't answer her yet. Don't call her back. Not until I've talked to Margaret. Emily looked at me over her mug. Her eyes were steady, steadier than they'd been in years. You think she wants something? It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. I think she's been doing this a very long time, I said, and I don't think she's done. Carol had already done her homework before I sat down in her office. Diane Reed, she said, turning her laptop to face me. 65. 12 years ago, she won a contested inheritance dispute against her brother-in-law, the kind of case that doesn't go your way unless you understand exactly how money and documentation work together. She closed the laptop. She doesn't just know the law, Jack. She's used it. On people who loved her. So what do? We let her meet Emily. She held up a hand before I could respond. But Emily doesn't go alone. Ohio allows one-party recording. Emily carries her phone audio running, and Diane never needs to know. Whatever Diane says in that room becomes evidence the moment Emily walks out with it. The meeting happened on a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop on the north side, Diane's choice, which told me everything. High ceilings, soft lighting, the kind of place that makes people feel safe enough to sign things they shouldn't. Noah stayed with me. We sat at the kitchen table and worked on a puzzle neither of us was really seeing, and every 10 minutes, Noah would look at the door and then back at the puzzle and not say anything, which was harder to watch than if he'd cried. Emily called at 3:47. Her voice was shaking. Dad. She gave me a paper to sign. My hand tightened on the phone. Don't sign anything. Come here. She was at my door 20 minutes later, still in her coat. The envelope held out like something she didn't want touching her anymore. Carol arrived 6 minutes after that. She read the document standing at my kitchen counter, and I watched her face go through 3 distinct stages: recognition, controlled fury, and then the cold, precise calm of a woman shifting into action. This isn't a property adjustment, Carol said. This is a full waiver of marital asset claims. If Emily had signed this, she would have walked away from the divorce with nothing. No share of the house, no portion of the accounts, nothing. She looked at Emily directly. She timed it perfectly. Marcus's criminal case is moving. Once his assets are under court review, this window closes. She needed your signature before that happened. Emily's chin trembled. Then her jaw set hard, the same jaw that had taken a blow 3 weeks ago and not broken. She cried, she said. She actually cried, and I almost... Her voice cut off. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. I almost believed her. That's what makes her dangerous, I said. Carol filed the motion that night. By October 15th, Diane Reed had been formally charged under Ohio's 2023 Coercive Control Statute, a law she hadn't known existed, which was the only mistake she'd made in 20 years of practicing on people who trusted her. That evening, after Carol left, and Noah was asleep on the couch, Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea, and the house was very quiet. Dad, she said. Her eyes were tired and clear at the same time. I want to come home. Not back there home. Here. With you. I looked at my daughter's face, really looked at it, maybe for the first time in years, without fear obscuring everything else, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been locked tight since the night Margaret died. Then come home, I said. Marcus Reed was sentenced on the 23rd of October, 18 months with 3 years of supervised release to follow. The judge cited the video evidence, the fraudulent legal filing, and 7 years of documented abuse. He was handcuffed in the courtroom, and Emily held Noah's hand the entire time. And when the gavel came down, Noah exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since August. Diane received a 2-year suspended sentence, and a court order prohibiting any contact with Noah until he turned 18. She walked out of the courthouse without looking at anyone. Emily finalized the divorce in November. Carol had protected what was rightfully hers, enough to start over, enough to breathe. In the first week of December, Emily and Noah moved into Birchwood Lane. Noah spent his first afternoon walking through every room with the careful attention of a child mapping new territory. He saved the backyard for last. He stood at the edge of Margaret's garden in his winter coat, looking at the dormant rose bushes and the bare tomato stakes, and then he turned to me. "Who planted all this, your grandmother?" I said. "Every bit of it." He looked at the garden for a long moment, his breath making small clouds in the December air. "Then, Grandpa, can you teach me how in the spring—" My throat tightened in the best possible way. "I'd like nothing more," I said. A week before Christmas, I climbed to the attic and brought down a box I hadn't opened in 35 years. Inside, wrapped in an old pillowcase, my championship gloves, red leather gone soft, and cracked, the padding compressed flat from years of storage. I carried them to this kitchen table. Beside them, I placed the MMA gloves Marcus had thrown at my feet, the ones Margaret Hayes had returned after the case closed, stiff and unworn, still nearly new. 2 pairs. Everything that had happened between them. Emily looked up from her book. Noah set down his pencil. I found Margaret's old wooden keepsake box on the shelf, the one she'd used for letters and small photographs, and I laid both pairs of gloves inside. Then I closed the lid. "Are you throwing them away, Grandpa?" Noah asked. "No." I set the box on the shelf beside Margaret's photograph. "Keeping them." "What's the difference between them?" I looked at the box for a moment. Then I looked at my grandson. "One pair was for winning," I said. "The other one reminds me that strength only means something when you use it to protect the people you love." Noah studied the box with the particular gravity of a child filing something away permanently. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to his homework. I made 3 cups of tea. I set one in front of Emily, one in front of Noah's smaller mug, and sat down with my own. The kitchen was warm. Outside, Margaret's garden lay still under the December cold. I knew it would come back in the spring. Frank called at 8:30 that evening. "I saw a piece in the dispatch this morning," he said. "They called you the quietest father in Columbus. How do you feel about that?" I looked at Emily, her book open again. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. I looked at Noah, his pencil moving, his socks still mismatched, one white, one gray, just like the night this all began. I looked at Margaret's photograph on the shelf beside the box with the 2 pairs of gloves. "I think that's the first time they've gotten anything right about me, Frank," I said. "If you've stayed with me this long, then you already know this wasn't a story about fighting. It was a family story about what happens when the people you love most are quietly being taken apart piece by piece while the world looks the other way. I'm not a hero. I'm a 69-year-old man who made a promise to his wife, broke it, and spent 3 weeks paying for it in a way I never saw coming. If there's one thing I'd tell any father watching this, don't wait until your hands are the only option left. Talk to a lawyer earlier. Listen closer when your daughter goes quiet. The silence before the crisis is always louder than people realize. We just don't know how to hear it yet." In the grandpa stories, I grew up hearing the old man always knew what to do. I didn't. I stumbled. I got it wrong before I got it right. But I believe, and I say this as a man who has knelt beside his wife's grave and asked God for guidance more than once, that when we act out of genuine love for our family, even our mistakes can be turned towards something redemptive. These grandpa stories don't always end the way movies do. Sometimes justice is slow. Sometimes it costs everything before it gives anything back. But it comes. In my experience, it always comes. This is just one family story among millions happening right now in quiet houses on quiet streets. If any part of it reflected something you've lived through in your own family story in someone you love, I hope it reminded you that you're not alone. If this grandpa story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Your story matters more than you know. And if you haven't already, subscribing to this channel costs you nothing, but means everything to the people behind it. Thank you for staying until the very last word. A final note. Some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely to illustrate real human experiences. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, we completely respect that. Please feel free to explore other channels that suit you better. But if you stay, we promise to always make it worth your time.